Hello and welcome to another episode of the TF Cast. Today's date is December 1st. And
With us today, we have Jessica Potter from the Blue Earth County Historical Society's podcast, Surrounded by History. We're super excited to talk about some local history and your production and what's going on there. Jessica, please tell us a little bit about the podcast, introduce it to people who might not have heard about it, and where they can hear this thing.
Fantastic. Super excited. Surrounded by History is the name of our podcast. We've been doing this since January of 2019 in partnership with Radio Mankato. So right now it currently airs on Saturdays at 11:05 on KTOE, and then it lives on the Blue Earth County Historical Society's website. So people can listen to past episodes through our website at blueearthcountyhistory.com.
Yeah, and if you've never, just check out the Blue Earth County Historical Society's website, because I was like, oh, cool, a Mankato podcast, but then there's instantly a whole slew of things that are the questions you would have. Many of them are answered, but let's just talk about podcasting a little bit. What was your favorite one to make, and what's your process like for making these things?
So we were approached by Radio Mankato back, it would have been 2018, and they were changing up the format. Most of our local media sources have changed up their format to streaming and things like that, and the radio station was no different, and they wanted to try to come up with something a little bit different than a talk format. And so they approached us about doing a podcast, and I thought, well, I can't do a podcast. But then the whole premise was to just talk about local history, which I can totally do. So it's just been a really fun opportunity to bring what we typically do in writing. We write for our newsletter, we write publications, or we create exhibits with three-dimensional way of telling a story. So this was a different way of being able to tell stories, which is really all that the Historical Society is about collecting and telling stories. And so the process, really, they handle all the tech because that is not my gift. But otherwise, the process is just using the resources we have at the Historical Society. There's a lot of stories that we know just through the resources that we have, through the stories that we've already told, through some of our different outlets or stories we've been told. And so it's really a matter of just picking a topic and then digging into it a little bit deeper. Writing it, I write them all, and then we record them. So, I mean, it's been a lot of fun for me. I have a huge, deep passion for history, and so to be able to dig into a topic, I probably spend more time on it than I should, but I like to know the depth of something and not just the simple, top layer of a piece of information. I really want to know, how did it happen? What are the details? And so I kind of dig in a little bit deeper, and then it all sits in my head sometimes, and other times it makes it into the podcast.
What kind of materials are you going through?
So the main material that we use that is at anyone's fingertips is newspaper accounts. So we have actually clipped the newspaper and indexed it from 1870 to present. The newspapers that arrive today are being clipped and indexed and put into files. And so I can pick a topic and I can go pull that file. I have information, over 100 years worth of information that's been in the newspaper right in front of me, and then I can piece the story together.
Wow.
That was actually a question that I wanted to ask about how history is being written today with this kind of explosion of media that we've had. Previously, I would kind of imagine that you have a few resources like public record and, newspapers. How do you even approach the amount of information that's currently being,
that's a really interesting question, because I think with a historical society, we're paper people. That's how we function. I mean, our job since 1901 is when the organization was founded, has been to really collect paper. photographs, books, atlases, maps, a lot of things that are generated on paper, the written word. And now we're in a world that is so digital. It is it's very hard for a historical society to shift to how do we preserve digital. Even photographs are only available digital now. Something like this is a digital format. So there's a lot of questions for us about how do you manage digital. Where you give me a pile of papers and photographs, I know how to manage that. So it's been a shift in how we do our work, not just in how we present it. That's one piece, but how do we collect it and manage it and preserve it. The big thing there is, and you guys see it with all the technology you have even around you, that how often do you have to replace it or upgrade to the next thing? So that's something we have to think about. I'm going to say this, and I'm going to date myself because you guys will not have a clue because you're too young, but we have a family history that is on a 5-inch floppy. Okay. So they're this big, not the little square ones, but the big square ones.
Sure.
Now we have absolutely no device to be able to get that information off of there. There's no software, there's no hardware. So that's an example where we're lucky that they printed that family history and they gave us the disc as well, but they printed it. Now we have paper. Now we can manage it. Because this is not a manageable source. And so, and everything's moving to the cloud now, but what's going to come after the cloud? We moved everything from the hard floppies, the 3.5 floppies, to DVDs. Then we saw that there was holes in DVDs. So we were moving to flash drives. We see that there's holes in flash drives. So, all of this technology is so rapidly changing that give me a piece of paper and I'll take care of it.
How much paper do y'all have?
Oh, well, I mentioned that the organization was founded in 1901. That's when we started collecting the history of the county. The Historical Society is located at the History Center, which is just down the road from you guys. So I expect to see you visiting quite often. Down on the corner of Warren and 5th Streets at 424 Warren Street. That's about a 16,000 square foot building. And that is where we store the history of Blue Earth County. So when you ask me how many pieces of paper, 16,000 square feet worth.
Oh, sure. That is, how do people interface with that? Like if someone wants to come down there and like get access to these resources, what do they have to do?
Walk in the door.
Oh, sure. So
there's no secret passwords. There's no secret knocks. No, we are a public institution. So we're not a lending library, so you can't check anything out. You can't, bring a library card in and be able to check something out. But we have a research center that is open to the public Tuesday through Saturday. There's an admission fee to use our resources, but all that money goes back into operations so that we can be an open organization. We are a nonprofit organization. So just paying admission to the museum or the research center or the Hubbard House, that's how we keep the lights on. And then the resources are right there. They're literally at your fingertips. And old-fashioned card catalogs, which you guys probably don't know what those are either. But that's how you search and you find stuff that you want. And besides physically coming to our building, we've also recently added a lot of digital content onto our website. So we have volunteers that are constantly creating indexes and databases so that you can do searching that way. And so if you are looking for an obituary or a map or atlas or something like that, a lot of that content is now searchable online. You can't necessarily see the record, but you can see the notation that drives you to say, hey, I need a copy of that, or I need a version of this. So that's what we do every day.
Using an example of one of the episodes that I listened to about the county fair that I thought was pretty cool. What would researching for an episode like that look like? I assume maybe you've started with the topic. You're like, we're going to make one about the county fair, and then you'd go through your records and search county fair and see what kind of comes up over the years and maybe what changes have been made and what other articles have been logged?
Yep. So really, it is really that simple and that complex. The first thing I do, so I'm working on some new podcasts that will air very soon. One of them is going to be on Christmas lights in Mankato.
Okay.
So I literally went to the vertical files where all of our newspaper clippings are. I pulled out about 5 folders that were about Christmas, and I've gone through every single article in there to see what is it telling me about traditions or activities, parades, lighting contests, whatever there was. Sometimes that topic will lead you to, oh, wait a second, they're talking about this festival. What is this festival? So then it takes me to another folder to read more about the festival to understand how did that fit into the whole picture. So, that's a lot of it. Even with the fair, it's a matter of going to the vertical files, pulling out those articles. There's also a couple of books that have been written about the history of Blue Earth County or the history of Mankato. They're older books, but I can go to those as well and get some tips and tricks about, okay, well, was it founded? Who were those people? And it's always about matter of trying to figure out those stories. And I think that's the great thing about history. A lot of people think history is just, it's that stuff that happened 100 years ago and there's no relevance to it today. And that's the whole point about the podcast, is to really get people to see that history is all around them. So even as I was walking into this building, I'm like, oh, this is a total 1970s building. So I wonder what was here before it was built. That's where my brain is constantly at. Why is this street called Warren Street? Why is that park Highland Park? All of the parks in Mankato, sidetrack, are podcasts. So there's a great podcast about Highland Park. But it's understanding the history that's all around us. So you go to the park and you have fun in it today, but why was this park carved out? When was this park carved out? What happened in this space? And that is where I totally geek out when it comes to history, is just thinking about the people and the events and the things that happened before. It doesn't have to be 100 years ago. It could be in the 1970s when they decided to build this building. It's having an appreciation for that there's history all around us, even in street names.
This is Cedar Street, though, and that's really bizarre. No one ever knows what I'm talking about when I say I live on Cedar Street, because it doesn't make any sense. Like, it's Warren, and then it's Warren, but it's Cedar.
It's because of Old Warren.
Oh.
Old Warren?
If you can just tell me, I would love to know.
Oh, no, I don't know if I can just tell you. It
You
seems like you might have to do some research.
It seemed like it was on the tip of your tongue.
Old Warren Street.
Yeah.
That's why. Old Warren Street is down here, where you can actually still see it's a little bit more of a walking trail. It's by the apartment building. And so that is why. So same thing with Front Street. So here's a perfect example. If you looked up the address for Loose Moose, the restaurant downtown, you're going to see that it has a Front Street address. That's the name of the street, is Front. Have you ever heard of Front Street?
I mean, I've heard people say Front Street.
Well, there's that's not, the Front Street over here is close to like the 410 project and stuff. So that's a different front.
Right.
Yeah.
That's Front Street as well.
But did it go through?
It went all the way through.
Because it went through the mall.
It went all the way through. And it actually went to the Wine Cafe.
Interesting.
The Wine Cafe is a Front Street as well. But the street,
I know that. That's where I work.
The street has been renamed Riverfront Drive. But only part of it's been renamed Riverfront Drive, where Loose Moose and Pub 500 or the 410 Project all still have Front Street addresses. So the same thing here. You have Cedar, you have Warren, you have Old Warren, you have Highland, you have all of this stuff, and it's because of progress or things changing, that has reorientated streets, it has renamed streets, whatever it might be. But if you get right down to it, you'll find out that, oh my gosh, well that's that street because like Fow Street, which is right down here, is named after somebody who lived here. That was the last name, and he was in the House of Representatives. So that's how the street got named. If you drive around town and you're like, gosh, what are these weird names? They're probably somebody. That's another podcast, by the way, is street names.
Yeah, I think I saw that one. That one too. Like I said, I gravitated towards all like the happenings, like like the big. Like the first one I listened to was the pandemic one of the Spanish flu.
That one was really interesting because we were recording it, and we were recording it in February of 2020. And the day that we were recording, I'm on the podcast saying, "Oh, now they just renamed it and they're calling it COVID." But before that, that was not how we referred to it. And so I don't know what this thing is, but now we call it COVID. And it was such a bizarre experience. And then the whole thing I was talking about, and you might remember, the whole thing I was talking about is the parallels between 1918 and what we were just starting to experience. So it was almost like having this foreshadowing of what was going to come, but it was using history to say, hey, this is what happened in 2018, and in 1918, but it actually was foreshadowing what was yet to come for us in 2020. It was a really weird place to be, almost like in a time warp between two very different but very, very similar historical events that happened. Yeah. And so everybody, I had a lot of people throughout the pandemic saying, we really hoped that you were going to be wrong. And I'm like, yeah, history is not wrong. I told you it was going to last 2 years. So for those listening who don't know it, the Spanish flu, which was 1918 influenza outbreak, actually lasted until 1920. And so we're still in it. If you put parallels. And then I think you listened to the typhoid one as well. Again, more parallels about how we have public health issues, and when you're in the midst of it, you can't see the way out. And so there's a lot of panic and a lot of misinformation. Even then, there was misinformation about how does the disease spread, and what do we need to do to kind of contain it. So it's a very interesting. That's what I love about history, is just how it repeats and how we can learn from it. But I think we're human, and we don't want to, we want it to be the first time that this has ever happened. But there's so much we can learn from the past.
There are differences. Like I was listening to the one about typhoid, and I was like, well, like they just made like some silly mistakes, like when they like reversed the flow into those areas, and then they had sewage back up in people's drinking water more than they had previously. It was like, well, now I think that they would have probably like said, okay, this is what we're going to do. And then they would have researched it, and we're like, okay, we're not going to do that. And then people would have been like, well, they changed their minds, but like instead now they were just drinking poo water. Like, so I guess
but I'll just throw out there Flint, Michigan.
Oh yeah. Well, that's another thing.
Okay. But that's something that is in our recent story, but you're saying that, well, we should know better, but we do know better, but we don't always reflect back to like, okay, how do we know better? It's because we reflect on the past to understand, okay, those were the mistakes that we made, or those are the wrong turns we made. So how do we stay on course and learn from that, and hopefully make better decisions going forward with different things. So there's one of the podcasts I think you listened to was about the soybean oil spill out at Honeymead, which is now CHS. And that was the catalyst for the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. We didn't have that before. So they did not know that you were not supposed to dump stuff into the river, and it was going to have an effect all the way down into the Mississippi River. And so that oil spill was one of the triggers for the creation of the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency.
Yeah, I think they probably knew a little bit because they didn't tell anyone at first. Like I shouldn't have laughed, but I did. They're like, oh, they didn't tell anyone for like 2 days. I'm like, well, I bet they didn't. That's a big mess.
It's a big mess. It's a big mess. But I don't know. I don't know if at that time they still had a really firm understanding of the consequences.
Yeah.
You know, I think, again, it's when you have hindsight, you understand the consequences. And at that time, they still didn't. They weren't, because it was winter, it was January, so they weren't thinking about what was going to happen in the spring when it all thawed. That was the problem. If it would have happened in the middle of summer, they would have been able to see that action right away. But that was in the middle of January. Everything was frozen, goo, you know, kind of slimy. And they weren't thinking about, hey, when the ice is out and this is flowing, where is it going to go and what kind of damage is it going to do? So
that kind of reminds me of something that I experienced growing up when the AMPI caught on fire in New Ulm. And there was Butterbergs in the river and butter in the streets and what? Yeah, they had a.
That's a podcast.
That's not in Blue Earth County though.
No, it's not. I'm like, you could make your own podcast.
But they had a butter silo like catch on fire and it exploded and there was like butter. There was butter everywhere. Like
That's wild.
Butter in the river. It was so much butter. I don't think anyone like died or anything. It wasn't. I'm not sure. I shouldn't say that. But I remember it. I remember there being butter everywhere. But you just don't think about those things even happening or like how huge they would be just years later. Mm-hmm. What are some things that you would have not been exposed to had not for the production of this podcast? Like, what are your little morsels of history that you've learned through this?
You know, I think I've been with the organization for a number of years, and I think for me, it's being able to dig deeper. A lot of just over the course of the time that I've been with the organization, I have a lot of little bits of information about a lot of different things, but with this project, I've been able to really dig deep. And there's one piece that I'm working on that I'm really digging really deep into, and I'm hoping that it turns into more of a series, and also so I don't want to give too much away. I'm just going to build the excitement, and some programming to go along with it. But it's, we've written about it before. It's about a murder trial that happened, of course, close to the turn of the century, and we've kind of always done the. Everything is over. Now here's that recap article that shows up in a magazine or in a book or whatever. So we'll just regurgitate this recap over and over again. And instead, what I've been doing is I've been going from day one that it hit the newspaper, and I've been reading every single article. And so I'm following the whole thing as if it's a trial that we are watching on TV, and you're watching new information get unfolded every day. And so I'm not jumping to the recap. And it has just been so interesting to see so many inconsistencies, to see the role that the media is playing. At this point in time, the role the media is playing in this trial. And, you know, I already know how it ends, but I'm still like, I want to know what got us to that point where we gets to the end. So I'm hoping that becomes a little bit more of a different parts of a podcast rather than just my one and done. This might be a podcast series where we unveil little bits of the crime and the trial, and do a little bit longer of a series. So a little true crime, I guess, right? A true crime podcast.
Murder mystery.
Yeah.
It's the hottest thing right now.
Yeah. So it's those are the things that have been fun. I love to do research. I love to write. And so it's given me a new outlet as the director of the organization. It's given me a new outlet to be able to foster my own passions that are still benefiting the organization. So that's been, I'd say out of it, that's been my biggest little nugget. Otherwise, yeah, if you want to challenge me in Blue Earth County trivia, I'm going to kick your butt. Otherwise, I don't know that I'm going to be going on Jeopardy anytime soon.
And you produced the show with a local radio host, Jeff Lang, as well, right? Is he on all the episodes?
Yes, he is, except for the very first one.
Okay.
But he is, he's also known as Stunt. He's better known as Stunt in the community.
Hockey games.
Or
and
Stunt
stuff.
Monkey. And, but he is a huge history geek, just like me. And so when we are talking history, I just can't call him Stunt. I got to call him Jeff. Yeah. And we have some great conversations. We have, it might be nice sometime to just have a conversation like this with him because we tend to have a lot of things we talk about after or before, like, oh my gosh, did you realize this happened? You know, because we both kind of geek out on this stuff. So he's been a great partner in all of this. He runs all the tech for me and also contributes to some of the content as well. And so it's been a great partnership.
That's cool. It's a fun back and forth you have, I think.
Thank you. Thanks.
Balance as well. And I think you were talking earlier, it might have even been before we started, like the shift from, and you've mentioned it a couple of times too, the shift from writing and publishing in that way to doing speaking and podcasting. And I'm sure that it reaches a whole new audience and it communicates it in a different way, and it probably sticks with people in a different way as well, where reading it is one version and then hearing it, in a fun, it probably catches them differently.
I think it does.
Kind of, it sticks with them longer, or informs more of their overall like appreciation for the history probably. I know that I felt like that for me. So.
Awesome. I love that. That's fantastic. I think the interesting thing for us was the pandemic was a big turning point for the organization. I told you, we're used to preserving paper. We're used to managing paper. We were used to doing things a certain way. And the pandemic made us do things differently. And so we took everything that we did in person and we had to figure out how to reach people in their homes, which was the first time we'd ever had to do that. And so we shifted our programming to virtual, which was... if you would have told me that we were going to be doing that, I would have said there's no way. But we were in the moment. We had to figure something out. How were we going to keep our members and our supporters connected with us when they physically couldn't walk in the building? And so we shifted that. We put we figured out how to put a ton of content together digitally. We have a wonderful series on our Facebook page called History in a Minute, which is like a little tiny mini podcast, but it's using historical images and it tells that story in a quick little minute. You get a little snippet of history. So we started doing those. We started doing then and now photos. We found this slider fun thing on our website as one of our pieces where you could take an old photo and a present day photo and you could kind of slide back and forth so you could see how the building or how that place had changed. So we just started creating all of this content and we did some of our programming was virtual through Zoom. And we found, so because we're the Blue Earth County Historical Society, a lot of people think, we only have people who are interested in us that live in Blue Earth County. But we have people all over the United States that are members because they have connections to Blue Earth County. We found that we were reaching more of our members and supporters going virtual because now it wasn't up to them walking in the building. We were coming to them. So the podcasts were coming to them. The History in a Minute's were coming to them. The programs were coming to them. And so all of this just really changed the way we were doing things, even with exhibits. It's a physical exhibit in our building, but we figured out a way to have a virtual option to be able to still view it. So you could be living in California and you still have access to the Blue Earth County Historical Society in a very real way. So, that's been a really, really interesting. And now we are not going to give up the virtual component. A lot of our programming now is hybrid. So those that are wanting to be in the building in person have that opportunity. And those that are living in Florida can just come on Zoom and watch it at the same time.
Sure.
That's great.
What is a lot of these programs like? What kind of programming are you talking about?
So we do a monthly program. So a couple different things. We do a monthly program that could be on any topic. So last month I did a presentation about the history of the Blue Earth County Historical Society because it was our anniversary, 120th anniversary. So that was a hybrid program. So we had a few people in the room, we had people online, and then it's recorded so people could watch it after the fact as well. This week, tomorrow, we have Vine, who is down the street from us. They have a group that has published a book. They're going to come in. They're going to talk about their book they published. And it's going to, again, be available as a live stream. So people will be able to watch it on Zoom as it's happening, be in the room, or it'll be recorded and they can watch later. We also have a program the third Saturday of every month called Talking Ancestors. And it is just a group of people who want to come together and talk about genealogy and family history. And they only now meet virtually because the people who attend are all over the United States. And so they don't necessarily have to have a direct connection to Blue Earth County, but they could be just working on family history. And so you can get together with a bunch of other family historians and say, I'm stuck. I can't figure out how to find this ship record or, whatever. You've got that audience or that group of people that are doing that same kind of research. And that will never come back as a in-person opportunity. That will remain a virtual opportunity so that more people have access to it.
It's cool that some of those things maybe have found a better way of being better able to serve the people that they're aiming to. So that's neat. It's
been really interesting. I mean, to me, I think it's been a really interesting shift. I honestly, I've been with the organization for 20 years and 20 years ago, if you would have said, oh, guess what's going to happen? You're going to do all this stuff virtually and create all this digital content, I would say no. Even if you would have told me in 2019, going into these podcasts, that this was going to be a big shift for us, I never would have believed it. But it's been exciting. It's been rewarding. It's been challenging. But it's so worth it. So worth it to get more local history content out there, get people starting to see what's all around them, and to, just realize that the fabric of our community is built on the past people, the events, the places, the things that have happened here. That's how our community was built to be what it is today. And we're all leaving our mark today for future generations to be able to look back as well. So, I'm a geek. I'm a history geek.
Yeah. But well, hey, that's cool. That's been one of the really neat parts about even this show is talking to some of the older folks. I shouldn't say older folks. Some of the people who've been doing music, they're not old. They've been doing music for like 20 or 30 years.
Gen Xers who are talking about
Gen Xers are now officially old people. Okay, I am officially an old person. I am a Gen Xer.
It was relative. It was intended to be relative.
I'm giving you guys
been
a hard
here longer
time.
Than me.
I gave it to you guys when I'm like, you don't know what this is. So it's all fair.
I think I've seen them in movies.
What's the one where they made the computer play chess?
All fair.
And hearing about what different music scenes have looked like in the past, different bands that kind of came through, groups that maybe you'd heard of, but not in the context that they were explained to you. So we've had some situations like that where we'll learn a lot about what music might have been around.
Or even just like the richness of the present. Like sometimes a lot of people are kind of like quick to write off Mankato as like, oh, there's not much going on here. But like if you pay attention for like 4 seconds, you just realize that's a lazy opinion. Cause like, you know, I thought like producing this is going to be a nightmare when I started it, and that I just can't run out of people to talk to. Like there's so much going on. It's just absurd. So
there is. And there always has been. And that's my job, is to get people to see that it's always been. It's always been an incredible place to live and to just experience life. And so we've got the people who are making news today, but there are so many generations that came before us that, you know, we're being innovative and creative, and we're putting this place on the map. And that's our role, is to make sure that we're remembering those people that came before us. And so exciting stuff. And yes, as a Gen Xer, I will tell you, it's pretty awesome to know that Green Day played in Mankato. Just saying.
That is cool. Where did they play? Did they play at Ballroom, or did they play at What's Up Lounge?
No.
I thought it was in St. Peter that they played, actually.
No.
Okay, all right.
I feel like I'm gonna keep this little nugget all to myself. I'm keeping it all to myself. I'm just gonna do that, but you know.
That's cool. Well, and Buddy Holly played here. We're working with the theater production probably.
Oh, good.
So yeah, that was kind of neat. I've been learning a bit about that, and with the Buddy Holly performance here, and then went to Clear Lake next, and then my partner's from Clear Lake, so I heard all about the other side of that story as well.
That is being surrounded by history.
She also works at Minneopa, which was a cool episode that you did too. So
awesome.
That was fun. I spent a lot of time walking around over there.
Good. I love it. That I create those, and you know, I think, I don't know, maybe you guys don't do this, but I always like, oh, nobody's listening, so it's fine. I can just talk. So, but you guys have followers. But it's pretty cool to know that people have listened and they appreciate them and they like them. So that gets exciting. I'm sure you guys feel the same way. You're like, I'm gonna put
I love
more
it when
out
people
there.
talk to me about the podcast. It's a great feeling to like know that people care.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you came to, or well, I don't know. You've been involved with this historical society for long enough that I think it's expected that you would enjoy history. But it's cool that you appreciate it like that. It's been really neat. It's been neat for us to like uncover some of those things as well, because our ambition behind starting this podcast was to show people that stuff is happening now. And so it's kind of like a fun connection too. Yeah, because like I couldn't begin to talk about the history, but I'm excited to, if I come across anything, see if the historical societies put out something about it, so I can help my context a little bit.
Yeah, and that's the big thing. I am a junkie when it comes to historical context. So if something is happening, I want to understand why. Why is that happening, or how, you know, so even if you just go and you read about the Spanish influenza, you're just like, really? But that's just not enough. You know, I need to understand why. Why was it called the Spanish influenza? Why, you know, what was the first case? How did it spread? I want that context to understand I think it's because I really enjoy social history. And so I want to understand what it would be like to live during that time. What are you seeing as propaganda? What are you seeing in the newspaper? What are you, the misinformation, the actual information? I think that for me, that's the big piece of it. That's probably why I dig really deep when I'm working on the podcast, is because I don't want to just know the surface. I want to understand the context of why was this happening? Why was this moment in time? It's really interesting when I find people who kind of weave their way through a lot of my stories, because I'm like, oh my gosh, he's there too. You know, it's just like, wow, this person, how could he be so involved in all of these different things? And it's helping to kind of gradually get to know who this person is. And you get to, and just like us, you know, we're leaving this mark, And let's say 50 years from now, 100 years from now, they're going to look back and say, who are these 3 guys? I'm going to put a shout out to our guy behind. 3 guys that put this podcast together. Who were they? What was their story? Why did they do this? What did they bring to the table for these conversations? And so, that's the fun part about it, is that historical context. So yeah, you guys are making history right now.
Go. All right.
Making it, surrounded by it, all of it.
Note to my future self to, I don't know, work out more or something. I have one question, actually. And it's, have you uncovered any historical bias? I don't know if that's the right way to ask it. Historical biases that you find to be like reoccurring in the materials that you've collected, where that like a certain paper talks a certain way, or like that history was recorded in a certain way where it may be either more or less unreliable? Any biases that you've of found interesting?
Oh, well, I think that's history.
Okay.
So to me, it's a really broad, I know you're trying to nail down a really specific question, but it is a broad answer that I have to give you, because yes, the newspapers in New Ulm during World War I are going to have a very different version of what is happening overseas, because it is a German community. Then Mankato is going to have reporting on the same incidences that were happening during the war.
Sure.
So, there is an example. So whoever your editor was for those newspapers, a lot of those early newspapers, they would take a political side. And so you have to, in history, you have to read multiple sources so that you get a very well-rounded picture. If you only read one source, you're only going to get one person's lens. And maybe that's the way to think about it. It's not necessarily like a community bias. It's that writer's bias. It's that writer's lens. So whatever lens you brought to the table today is how you're going to see things, and your lens is different. My lens is different because I'm old. And so how do we take our 3 lenses and come up with a general story of what happened during the 2020 pandemic? Because we had different experiences, but how could we come together and tell that story? So if you only left it up to me to tell that story, then your version of the story isn't going to be heard. So I think that's what you have to think about. I don't think that people 100 years ago were intentionally saying, I want to make sure that I am only telling this story so that no ethnic group could have their story told. That's not their mission. Their mission was to tell their lens. And so the thing with history is history repeats itself. Which we see with the Spanish influenza, we see with COVID, we see with the wave of immigration that happened at the turn of the century, 1900, with Ellis Island and all of the new ethnic groups that were coming. We see that with the new ethnic groups and refugees that are coming today. They're not the same, but they have parallels. And this is that point that if we can't look back to the past and understand how as a society what did we do well and what did we not do so well, I will guarantee you that in 1900 they did a lot of things not too well when it came to immigrants. Okay, and so what are we doing today? We're doing the same thing. Right? Because we didn't necessarily learn, or we have the lens of saying, well, it is different. This time it's different. Well, there's nothing different. It's really the same story. It's just set in a different lens. And so that's where I think, and I also think that as a society, we tend, I've always looked at it as a pendulum, that I think the pendulum swings where we feel like we have to have this lens, has to be the focus lens. And so we have to tell everything about I'm going to just say the Irish famine. We have to tell, because I'm going to try to be as neutral as I can. The Irish famine, we've got to tell it from the Irish perspective. And then no, we've got to swing it this way. Now we have to tell it from the potatoes perspective. And why did this happen? Was there a blight? And now they all died. And so we keep taking these these really extreme swings, and it's like we want to take one lens over the other instead of saying, let's put it all together and kind of make like a kaleidoscope, so that we understand how the whole thing happened, the historical context of how it all happened, instead of just saying, nah, I just want that lens.
Well, what I feel like is kind of like the thing that would make it different is the access to information that we have. That is like the big, truly radical shift that we've had, is like now anyone who has like basic literary skills does have access to nearly infinite information that they didn't have before. So we can take those lenses and see like, like where have things been underrepresented, or like what has happened. And I think like as we go forward, like we are going to see those things, fill in, and we'll have a more complete image of like what history is. And that might have been some of the things that I was trying to like get at in the beginning when I was saying like, what do you do with all this new digital information? Because now we do truly have like all of these lenses are being represented in some way.
Yeah.
And it's like, how will we organize them and make sure that, we actually know things?
Yeah. It's very interesting, because I mean, you didn't have to be, you don't have to have a PhD to be able to be the authority in something today. You didn't have to have a PhD to be an authority in something 100 years ago. So, I think that I caution where, that, we've got all this information in front of us, but I think I'm still going to go back to the basics of doing research. You have to look at multiple sources. Certainly. Because if you say that John Smith, who is the millennial version of everything, and everything that comes out of his mouth is the only thing I want to listen to, you aren't getting all of the information. Again, it comes back to context. And so the other piece that I struggle with is when something that happened 150 years ago is put in context of 2021. Instead of putting it in context of what was life like in 1850. So that it doesn't make it right or wrong, but it puts it in context so you have a better understanding of why were those decisions made. I don't want to go down, I don't want to go down a path. I am only coming from a historical perspective, that if Spanish influenza is a super easy one to kind of keep picking on. Why do you remember in the podcast, why did it get named Spanish influenza?
I don't.
So it was a publicity point, because in Spain, Spain during World War I was a neutral country. So the leader of Spain, the king of Spain, actually got influenza. If the U.S. president or one of the German hierarchy would have gotten influenza, they would not want to report it, because they would not want the other side to know that they were weak because they had gotten sick. So Spain was neutral. So it was very easy for as a world for us to say this was called the Spanish influenza, even though it didn't originate from Spain, because now they were basically saying, hey, this is worldwide, but we're not going to say that the United States has it. We're not going to say that Germany has it, because we don't want the allies or the Axis powers to know that one might be weaker than the other. So they picked a neutral country to then coin the phrase Spanish influenza. It has nothing to do with Spain, except for the king of Spain got it.
Interesting.
Wow. But that's context.
Yeah.
Right? Right or wrong? We can't go back to 1918 and say, why'd you blame the whole thing on Spain when they had nothing to do with it? But it was a propaganda piece during the war effort. So now that you know the context, it makes you understand that a little bit differently.
Well, and it's the pop version that survived too, so it does tell you a lot about like how people felt in that time as well, or like that no one was like ready to question it. Everyone thought that was the way that they should go about referring to it. or that's what stuck around. So yeah, that's interesting. And I suppose then it's less about uncovering specific bias and more about seeing if you can get all the biases to cancel towards zero, and you get some like good history.
Right. And you have to come to your own conclusions, because we're all bringing our own lens, our own bias to the table. And so that's our challenge. We're all going to bring our own bias to the table when we're doing this research or we're having these conversations. And so everything we do, and since the beginning of man, everything we do is based off of our lens or what we carry forward and how we interpret that. And how is that interpreted by the next person, by the next person, by the next person. And so I think it's just really, it's a really heady conversation we're having, but it makes your brain just kind of go, well, how do I know that information? And what are the biases that I bring to the table when having a conversation about that? Do I know the whole picture, or do I only know the CBS News version of that picture? And so there's just, I think it's good and bad. We have a lot of information at our fingertips. It's just, who are we? Yeah. I don't want to say it's like, who are we listening to, but just think about it. What is the lens that you bring, and how can we as a society have a kaleidoscope of all of these different lenses to hopefully have a clear picture? But I don't know that we ever will, because what is the clear picture?
Who knows how technology will go? But I'm glad that we have like lots of things going on right now, and I think they will. I think history will be more honest as we go forward, because we just have more of it to dig into. And, it probably will change how we just generally live. Like, 10 years ago, if you would have been like, hey, like, you're going to open your phone with your fingerprint, I've been like, yeah, right. You think I'm going to give Google my fingerprint? Absolutely not.
Now blindly Google, here you go.
No, I don't believe that I have any privacy anymore. Like, if someone wants it, they can basically have it. And like, I don't think there's any amount of money I could do to change it. I would take comfort in the fact that I'm not that interesting.
But as you're talking, then I'm thinking about the communist movement back in the 40s and 50s, when it was, really, if you sneezed the wrong way, you were considered a communist, and that was a big thing then. It was called the Red Scare, and so that was a big social, like, wow, you can't like them, and so it just that's where my brain went when you were talking about it. I mean, that's the reality of today, but it was the reality of then as well. The reality of a new immigrant coming to Ellis Island who can't speak any English. They're immediately, getting marked and put aside. They do not have privacy. So we think that because we're in a digital world that we don't have privacy today, but think about the scrutiny that centuries.
But you had deniability back then. Like right now, like Google could tell me where my eyes linger. You know what I mean? Like that is gone to some, and like some of those words, they don't mean the same thing anymore.
No.
People say communism now, and they just mean things that they don't like often. Like,
exactly.
It's just really silly. That's one of my favorite things about the English language in general is like, what might be what a word meant when it entered the public discourse is like, it doesn't mean that anymore because it changes, based on how we use it, because the language is context based entirely.
Exactly. You get it.
So yeah, I really like following words around, and I don't know if it's a problem or an interest, but like when I start saying something and I'm like, wait, do you know what you're talking about? Then
I know. It's context. It's context. It's all about context. Where did a word come from? Where did a phrase come from? When we say, we say a phrase, why do we say that phrase? Where did this come from? Yes, it's all about context. I mean, and as a Gen Xer, I, am very familiar with the Urban Dictionary, because half the things that are said to me, I have no idea what they mean, because I'm not caught up. So, you have to, but even I think back to I did not live in the 50s, just to make this clear. But in the 20s, in the 50s, they had a lot of slang for different things. And so to look up those words and realize that was just part of their everyday vernacular and how they were using language in different ways. And, you guys, obviously I can talk about history and the context of history, from words to places to people. I love all of it. So that's my passion.
Sure. Well, let's get folks pointed towards your podcast and so that they can listen to you talk about history. And I think we've done the thing today. Let's how do people get to the Blue Earth County Historical Society? How do they find your podcast? How do they find all of the pertinent things that we've talked about today?
Awesome. So definitely go check out our website. It's blueearthcountyhistory.com. On our website, just do a / for podcasts, and you'll get the list of all of the podcasts that have been recorded. I think that we might be close to at least 60 of them that we've done. So you can check those out. You can listen to KTOE radio every Saturday morning at 11:05, and you can hear them being aired that way as well. Come and visit us down at the History Center, which is at 424 Warren Street right here in Mankato. Literally like a stone's throw from where you guys are broadcasting today. Come check us out. Follow us on social media to check out all that great content. Lots of great stuff on our website. History Center is open year round, so lots of opportunities to come and dig and learn a little bit more about the history that surrounds us.
Cool.
That's awesome. Thank you for doing that too. I'm not going to pioneer that ship or whatever, but it's cool that ship is sailing smoothly.
This ship has been sailing for 120 years. It's just my job as the captain right now to keep it going.
That's awesome. You seem like a good fit for the role.
Thank you.
Keep it up.
Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
All right.